I would like to welcome you to this session on the role of geoscientists in public policy. And we have a very nice set of panelists today that will discuss the role of the geoscientists in public policy in the context of the research program of the European Geosciences Union. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Welcome. I'm Ian Stewart, Professor of Geoscience Communication, which actually means I know nothing about policy, absolutely nothing. What I know about is talking to the public and getting messages across about geoscience to non-technical audiences of all types, of which some of those are often kind of politicians and decision makers. But because I know nothing about it, we've actually got a panel that knows a lot about it. And so what we have got in front of us is a set of people who work on different aspects of policy, and are going to take us through their general kind of comments, and then what we'll do is we'll free up some time to get some Q&A from the audience. And I guess some of the kind of key issues is why we do it, why should we do it, what are the challenges, what are the pitfalls, and what are the advantages, what do we stand to gain from geoscientists kind of treading into policy dimensions. So on the panel we've got, and your far left is Lydia Harris, who's Scientific Advisor in the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology in London. And then Pascal Ehrenfreund, which is the Research Professor of Space Policy and International Affairs at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and also President of the Austrian Science Fund. And then we've already heard from Günter Bloschel, President of the European Geosciences Union. And then we then got Reinhard Hudl, Scientific Director of the GFZ, German Research Center for Geosciences, Potsdam. And then finally, Luca De Micheli, Secretary General of the Euro Geosurveys, the Geological Surveys of Europe. So what I'm going to do to kick off is to ask each of our panelists to speak for about 2-3 minutes, just outlining a statement of why they think this policy dimension is important for geoscientists. I'll be moderating the session, and we'll kind of kick back with some questions for the panelists, and then we'll kind of throw it open. So I think, Lydia, you've got the microphone. So.
Thanks very much. So I thought I'd just begin by giving you a little bit of an outline of how my team and the UK Parliament more broadly engage with scientists. So I'm from the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. We call ourselves POST for short. And we're a small team of scientists and social scientists that are based within the UK Parliament. And we support parliamentarians to access research evidence by giving them access to the research community. So we very much see ourselves as a bridge between researchers and Parliament. And I should probably point out that in the UK, there's a really clear distinction between Parliament and government. So for us, government is the organisation that develops policy and proposes laws, whereas Parliament debates those proposed laws and votes on whether to accept them or not. And it also scrutinises government as well. So it's kind of a check to see that government's doing what it ought to be doing. So my team, POST, is completely non-party political, and we work for all parliamentarians, which means that we work with a really diverse audience. So we're trying to communicate with people who have the entire spectrum of political views and also have very differing levels of scientific knowledge. So on the one hand, we may have members of our appointed chamber, the House of Lords, who will have had extended research careers themselves. On the other hand, many members of Parliament won't have much of a scientific background at all. And so how do we go about engaging with these people? So we organise events, which are opportunities for researchers to come into Parliament to talk about their work and to talk about the policy implications that has. We also produce written briefings as well. So this is an example of one of our little post notes, which is 4 pages. It takes a particular scientific topic and it places it into a policy context. And it highlights the policy issues that the new development in science or the new piece of research raises or could potentially raise in the future. And so the process for producing one of these is delving into the academic literature, but then going out and speaking to researchers from industry, academia, talking to government, talking to the third sector to get a really good understanding of what the range of opinions are around the topic. And then we pull that all together and we have the note peer-reviewed before it's published. So the idea is that we're aiming to be as accurate and as balanced as possible. And I should point out that many of these post notes are actually produced by PhD students who come for a 3-month secondment to post to work on it. And then I'd just like to highlight that beyond post, there are other areas of Parliament that rely very heavily on research evidence and engage very closely with scientists, and particularly the parliamentary select committees. So these are committees of parliamentarians that scrutinise the work of government. And we've got 2 committees that focus on science and technology, and they will have an inquiry on a particular area of government policy, and they'll put out a call for evidence, and anyone can submit written evidence. And many researchers and research organisations do. And then from that, they identify people who they would like to call back for further oral evidence. And so by engaging with a select committee inquiry, it's an opportunity not only to help Parliament scrutinise government, but also to help potentially shape future government policy as well. I think I'll leave it there, and I'll pass on to our next.
Okay. Pascal?
Does that work already?
Yep.
Does it work
It doesn't sound
already? No?
Hörst du uns? Ja?
I take this for the moment until your technology is fixed. Well, I'm very happy to be here this morning, and I'm actually I work in space policy, and in particular for space exploration, going out to Moon, asteroids, and Mars. So I will not talk about this today, but I have a lot of, I would say, experience talking to politicians, in particular in the United States, where the dialogue between scientists and politicians is actually a very, very active element and contributes very much to what can be done and how the future perspectives are for research. So we have a lot of challenges which are facing our planet Earth. The increase in magnitude and also in frequency. And geoscientists, they do play a very, very important role in helping to solve these societal challenges, not only through innovative research, but also through public awareness, and also to bridging to other sciences, doing interdisciplinary research, because geosciences in itself is incredibly interdisciplinary already. What you can see here on this Congress, which is enormous with 12,000 people. So since I'm the only person, I think, on the panel which has a space background, I will talk a little bit about the space activities, in particular the environmental satellites that monitor the biosphere. And they are becoming a very, very essential tool to help us to manage and sustain our very lives. And this space-based system, they comprise really a centerpiece for information and for data. And together with ground-based systems, there is a general system which can really be used in order to advance science and technology and our knowledge, and also how to solve humanitarian problems. So when you go to the exhibition hall, you will see a lot of information about ESA's, the European Space Agency's Earth Explorer missions, which are successful, and certainly also the advent of the European Copernicus space element has to be mentioned, in particular because the first Sentinel satellite has been launched earlier this month. So this program, Copernicus, represents a major step forward in ensuring long-term continuity of Earth observations. with imagery, radar measurements, atmospheric measurements, and they collect a vast amount of global data from the ground, from space, airborne and seaborne, which are necessary to gather information and to provide this information to public authorities, to international organizations, and to service providers. We have just had a year of, and last 6 months, 2 reports of the IPCC, which came out showing the human influence, in particular on the climate. Obviously climate has been seen as a risk multiplier, interacting significantly with societal challenges, and that includes, of course, water and food scarcity, disease, and really important issues which are societal challenges, which is a really important topic for public policy. So in order to master these grand challenges worldwide, it is really basic research, and geoscience research plays an immense role. And additionally, we have to educate a new generation which will be able to solve all these challenges. And that has to be a generation which is raised in a very different way, namely in an interdisciplinary background. They have to learn to work together in a team-based philosophy, like this is already partly started in the United States, this kind of options, because they have to learn to work on completely different topics together to solve these really very important issues, which are actually not so far from now. So I just want to say that close in that, in order to make all these things work and to improve and to advance science and solutions, governments, the private sector, scientists and society have to work together. And by scientists, geoscientists have a very, very, very important role in this process. And I think I keep it here. We continue later.
Thank you. Okay. The European Geosciences Union has as a main role to foster research in the geosciences. And our 2 main pillars are the General Assemblies, where we provide a forum, a platform for people to share their ideas, and our journals. We have 16 open access journals, where again, this is a forum to communicate new scientific research. I would like to highlight 3 points in the next 3 to 5 minutes, how these activities of the European Geosciences Union are related to public policy. The first point is open access. EGU has been a pioneer in open access publications, and this is now gaining ground internationally, not just in the geosciences, but also across all disciplines. The open access publication is much of a topic where we have done less progress and where further work is needed is open access data. EGU is actively considering revising the data policies. What data must be made transparently available in the publications? So we are starting to require statements, data policy statements in individual publications to highlight to the reader where data can be accessed. And I think this is needed for increased repeatability of studies and transparency of the science process. As models are getting more complex, data sets are getting more comprehensive. Often it is very difficult to judge what the reliability of the results are and make comparative analysis and studies. And for this we need a policy framework to support the open data policies. It's on the one hand, of course, it's an issue of funding, because some of the data are proprietary and require expenses. But on the other hand, it's also a matter of culture. I think there is a change in culture needed to make data that are collected freely available to all researchers. The second point I want to mention is permanency. In many areas of geosciences, we get out on the stage of public visibility when there is a disaster. The Sumatra tsunami was 10 years ago. Every time there's an earthquake, a flood, a drought, we are in the newspapers. And after the drought, after the flood has receded, then the public interest tends to recede. I think what is needed is a more permanent visibility of the geosciences in the public, a more permanent awareness, which will translate on a number of stages to a more visible and more effective use of resources and a stronger impact of the geosciences, starting from the secondary education level, where I think the geosciences in some countries of Europe are not adequately visible, down to funding structures. Often funding systems are quite short-term, while many of the processes we are researching are much longer-term. So again, there is some discussion needed how we can have more permanency of the funding availability. The third point I would like to make is interdisciplinarity, echoing some of what Pascal Ehrenfreund has already mentioning. The geosciences are very much an interdisciplinary field. While it is clear that each discipline needs to dig deeper to have a solid methodological basis, it's equally important to cut across the borders, particularly when it becomes to societal relevance. Fundamental research on a very limited area, very narrow area, is clearly important on the longer term. But then many of us are in the practice of translating fundamental research to societally relevant research. And here is where cutting across the disciplines becomes very important. Again, here we need to raise the awareness both among the scientists and policymakers about the need for interdisciplinarity, again with adequate funding schemes that give credit not just to narrow fields that dig the same hole deeper, but also the broader fields, that there is additional benefit for interdisciplinarity, but also increased awareness among ourselves for the need of cutting across the borders to have more synthetic research. Thank you.
Is this working? No. Yes, I'm Rainer Tüttel from Germany and representing our German Research Center on Geosciences. We are a member of the Helmholtz Association, that is one of the extra university research organizations. There is another important institution. This is our Geological Survey, the BGR, and these two institutions, together with the universities, are trying to cope with different challenges in the field of the geosciences. With the Helmholtz Association, we are confronted from our policymakers what they call the grand challenges. One of the grand challenges is Earth and environment, and we join forces with other research centers in Germany to try to come up with solutions for these challenges. As Günter Blöscher just mentioned, one such challenge was the tsunami in 2004, where we then gathered forces and tried and actually realized the tsunami early warning system for the Indian Ocean. But I would like to go one step deeper, and that is the point: how does the knowledge that we generate through our research and through, in a way, also our education, how does this actually get into the public domain? Because this is then relevant for public policy. And there we have simply to see that we are living in a revolutionary time, because the conventional media are not working in the same way as they did before. We are now confronted with the new media, with the social media. And this is really a completely different situation, because the decision makers, as far as Germany is concerned, are still depending on the conventional media. In Germany, for instance, on the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and these kind of print media. But this is not reality anymore. The communication takes place in other fora, in other situations. That is, I think, the first point I would like to make, that we take this into consideration. And this led, at least in Germany, but I see this around the globe in a way, to, let's say, the situation that the institutions are trying to publish their own results in high quality outlets, and this might give a very positive image, which not always might be the case if you look under these nice covers. So this is a challenge for ourselves in terms of how do we communicate. Is this an objective type of communication, or is it more a PR or lobbying approach? I think this is an important aspect that we have to take into consideration. And the geosciences as such are a prime example because, of course, there is basic research, but there is also a lot of applied research. And there are a number of challenges we are confronted with, and we are working in these aspects like hydraulic fracturing or carbon capture and sequestration or deep geothermal power generation. All these aspects are seen from different disciplines in different lights, like the social sciences, and then also the public discussions are sometimes quite critical. And this is a challenge for us as scientists because we are usually not trained to cope with these kind of discussions. Some of us have some skills that help. Some of us are lost. And therefore, I think it will be an important approach that we take these communicative skills maybe more into consideration, or we find, and this is my final point, new ways of how we communicate our knowledge, our experiences, our results to the decision makers in policy, in industry, and also in science organization. In Germany, we have chosen the way of academies. You might think this is an old-fashioned way. We have just started national academies in 2008. We did not have national academies before that time. And these are new types of working academies where we, for instance, go into what we call an innovation dialogue directly with our chancellor, directly with the government, and we work on topics like transmutation, on topics like fracturing, on mineral resources, and have direct contact with the ministers and the governments by way of having formed position papers by the best scientists that we have available in Germany. So this is one arrangement, one approach that might help to communicate our knowledge and our experience into this process, but we have to be aware that is just one aspect of the decision-making process.
Thank you. Luca.
Good morning. I'm here to substitute our president, Mart van Bracht, who unfortunately had to cancel at the very last moment. He asked me to speak on his behalf and on behalf of the Geological Service of Europe, sends his apologies and his greetings to all of you. I am the Secretary General of the Geological Service of Europe. I'm based in Brussels. We work on a daily basis at European policy level related to geosciences, and I will try to give you some hints and also to make some considerations that can then be discussed also with the panelists and with you later on not just the role of geoscientists in public policy, but also on the impact that we bring and we should bring to public policy. We had invited to be with us today a couple of members of the European Parliament that are very active in the field of geoscience. Regretfully, also them had to cancel at the last moment. It's It's on the one hand, it's a regret. On the other is positive, because we can speak more frankly, perhaps, among us. The Geological Service are the national agencies in charge for geoscience, so we are the public body. We are the bodies officially in charge for monitoring the subsurface and to provide the official data to the governments. So we have a clear role that is institutional. It's not just because we want to. We have to provide this type of information, this type of advice. And we have to be completely unbiased. Otherwise, we are not public servants anymore. And this puts us in a certain privileged position to get expertise on these topics. But this does not mean that those that are not public servants should not have a role in public policy. It's rather the opposite. Even if you are scientists or researchers, you have responsibilities. Not only we have an interest, because we want that geoscience is more and more important, and our skills and capacities used at the service of society, but because actually we have responsibilities in many fields, especially in educating politicians. But to do so, we must understand very clearly the framework, the political framework in which, even if we don't operate, in which we have an impact or are supposed to have an impact. I see many young people in this room today. Just a quick example. A few months ago, we had set a round of interviews at Geosciences to hire a couple of stagiaires, trainees. And after the pre-selections, I personally interviewed the final candidates, and was very interesting. Was an experience for me. I posed 2 questions, the same questions to each of them, only 2 initial questions, then further question afterwards. And with those 2 initial questions, I was expecting to put them in a comfortable situation, so to start a nice dialogue. And the first question was standard one, talk about yourself, and everyone went very well. Then I asked, tell us something about the European Union system. And when you apply for a position, even as a trainee in a Brussels-based organization, you are supposed to know well the environment in which you are then expected to operate, and was extremely astonishing to find out that they were not able, no one of them able to say a single word that had a sense on how the European Union system operates. What I mean, even if we are geologists or geoscientists, we absolutely need to understand how the policy in Europe and at our country level impact on our work, but more important, vice versa, how our work can have an influence in future policies. In the European Union, geoscience is more and more important in the past years. You all know well why. The growth of China, the growth of India, the need for raw materials, the increased need for raw materials, and the weakness of Europe in this has put very high on the agenda of European Union politicians the role of geoscientists. Nevertheless, it is clear that a lot of work needs to be done to educate them, and this is where we have to do all together, especially those that work in the public sector, but also those who work in the more poor science sector. And this is what we have also been discussing with the EGU colleagues in the past week, so how to increase the synergies. I would stop here because, just to give...
Unless you want to do the question to the audience about the European Union and see how many people can answer your question here. I think there's a lot of points there from our panelists that are seed points for discussion, and I'm going to open it up in just a second, but I think what I'd like to do is just go back to the panel for 1 or 2 sentences on the key point in this session is the role of geoscientists, and as Luca's kind of pointed out, there's a mixed audience, but there's a lot of young geoscientists there. So my question would be, why should they get involved in policy? I don't know who wants to pick it up first, but just to see if they've any comments. What's in it for them to do? Lydia, do you want to? Or
just one word, it's the sustainability of financial resources, you know. We are competitive with, it's not only the geosciences that need money, but there's besides science, the social arrangements and so forth. And I think it's from this point of view, it's important. But this is not important by itself that we get sufficient financial or material support, but it's really necessary that we get this support to try to help come up with solutions to the grand challenges that are there. And the geosciences are, whether they want or not, they are one of the leading sciences for the future, because the questions, whether they are natural catastrophes, whether they are related to mineral resources, to questions of climate change and adaptation measures, or nutrition, water, and so forth. They are all really connected to the earth sciences, and therefore I think it's important that we get the support, because we have also the moral responsibility with our education to try to really help to solve these kind of questions, and at the same time do basic research to come up with unexpected results that might help us in other aspects as well.
Okay, I think Pascal is interested. I think Lydia maybe after.
I don't know, do they work now? Or? Okay,
we abandoned those.
We just do this. Well, I wanted just to show you a bit of comparison, how actually easy it is for geoscientists, or should be, you know, really to approach policymakers and make their case. You know, I work in space exploration, and we want to send humans to Mars. So in the times right now on Earth, economic crisis, climate change, it is very, very, very difficult to convince policymakers, you know, in order for such large-scale endeavors. Whereas in geosciences, which really relates to the essential well-being of humans, it is actually very, very easy, I think, to convince policymakers how important it is, because they will always feel, I would say, and help you and try to make things happen if they have the feeling they can sell that also to society and public at large. And that's why I think it is much easier for geoscientists, also being so international, interdisciplinary, from oceans to atmospheres to climate change and energy. It is a much easier task for geoscientists in order to approach policymakers, and in particular for more funding, for research, for public awareness, and also educational programs. I think that is something what every geoscientist should know and use.
Lydia, you?
Yeah. So I think this is probably going to mirror some of the points that we've had drawn out. But I mean, partly it's about having what you do being recognised and valued by society more widely, and then that feeds into sort of funding, and you know, if society recognises what contribution the research that you're doing can have to policy decisions and to other aspects of society, then hopefully when it comes to the governments making the funding decisions, they'll take that into account and respond accordingly. I think also, sort of on a personal level, particularly if you're sort of in the early stages of your career and your career may go in many different directions, then, you know, having the opportunity to talk about your research to people from outside of your field is a great way of kind of developing experience and gaining new skills as well, and that may then take you in other directions. And if it does take you in other directions beyond research, then it's fantastic to have people who understand how scientific research works, to be in other parts of society to kind of influence the culture there and sort of and sort of generate a culture of recognising the importance of scientific evidence. And then also potentially it having an opportunity to kind of impact on the direction of your own research. And so if research is addressing the questions that the public are concerned about in these different areas, then it'll make it easier to kind of make it'll make it easier to inform future policy decisions if the research base actually can answer some of those areas of uncertainty that crop up in public debate.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Gunther, do you want to? And then we might go to the audience.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this. Directly to the question, for what reasons young scientists should get involved in policy. There are selfish reasons to get, well, to, in the long term, to make their own funding sustainable, and there are unselfish reasons to make this a better world. And I think the kind of reasoning, echoing other speakers just a couple of minutes before, I think we have a very strong reasoning basis in the geosciences, because what we're doing is very relevant to society. On the one hand, for a sustainable society, geosciences is immensely important, starting from climate, resources, everything in our environment depends very strongly on the geosciences, the atmosphere, water, everything. So sustainable society, I think, is very one strong argument. And on the other hand, we can even make an economic argument, because many politicians do not realize that any euro that's invested in research on a geoscience topic may pay very well back in the future through more efficient instrument, through more efficient technologies, more efficient management strategies of managing our planet. So also from a strictly economic perspective, I think we're in a very good position to bring our agenda across to the political arena.
Can we maybe go to the audience now? If there's any kind of questions that come out of some of these points, and if you have one, maybe you could, there's a microphone in the centre, if that's the easiest way, otherwise maybe we can kind of pass this one. We don't have another floating mic, do we? If you have got a question, maybe you could say who you are and what your kind of affiliation is, and maybe if there's a particular person in the panel it's directed to, or whether it's general. But I think there's a question. Maybe if you shout, you'd probably be... Okay, fine. That's the way we'll do it.
And I also chair a planning committee of a British national park. And I know all of you have got national or international perspectives. I just wanted to throw in a point about local and regional policy making as well, because I think that's somewhere that we can make an impact, whether it's mineral planning or waste planning or coastal management, all of those, we can have an impact in the earth sciences. And I'm not saying that national perspectives aren't important. I was just taking the example from the UK, and I know quite a bit about planning policy. And planning policy starts at the national level, and then local government has to follow national policy.
Yeah.
So national policy is very important, but that doesn't mean to say you can't have an impact.
And it may be easier at the local level to get into things like that. So the local kind of issue, the local authorities? And then yeah.
Sorry, maybe you can hear me anyway. But, so it's just an interesting point that because of the local nature of the impacts that some of these issues have, it means that's potentially a great way into getting parliamentarians' attention on a topic, because they've all been elected by a particular local constituency, and they are very focused on what their constituents think and their position in terms of being re-elected. And so if there is a topic that does have a very specific local impact, then that can really grab their attention and be a great opportunity to kind of make them aware of the broader issues around it as well.
And I think Luca wants to kind of...
I can also give maybe two short examples. One was what I mentioned already, the tsunami early warning system. That, of course, was a decision between Germany and Indonesia and other states, but we were quite happy to come up with a decent, scientifically, technological, functioning system, so that somebody could punch the red bottom, and then what? That was the big question. Mm-hmm. Because then it comes down to the very local arrangements. What do the people do? Do they all jump into the car and try to drive and get in the congestion? And this is what we call the last mile. That was the big challenge at the end of the day. And this kept us busy for many more years. We just completed this after 10 years now. So that was a prime example of what it really means to organize for these kind of catastrophic events on the local level, because then every mayor has to make decisions for his village or city and so forth. And then you already, all of a sudden, you discover cultural differences. Hindus would have a different attitude, or as compared to Muslims, and that is significant. Because at the end, if the catastrophic event happens and you have the same kind of casualties, you are blamed as the engineers or the scientists, So that was one example. The other one is climate change and adaptation. This must happen at the regional level. And we have for instance, with research from paleoclimatic approaches, we have good indications to learn from the past for the future in terms of what could you expect if it gets warmer, if it gets wetter, and how could you arrange for that. But this all has to happen at the local level, and we work with mayors and with regional authorities in this field.
Luca, do you want to say something? Or you? I think Luca, yeah.
But, I would rather revert the perspective. Local authorities are absolutely basic in having an impact, but they are also those that get the results of some decisions taken at the higher level. For instance, when a piece of European Union legislation enters into force, this applies to all member states at all levels. So the national government has to receive the legislation, then to implement it, and then goes down to the national level. So the role, in fact, of the, let's say, local or regional level is, in fact, should be the opposite. Should be to ensure to follow the process very closely, even if it is apparently so far away from what we do every day. And the same applies to the scientists. If we stay only close in our labs doing our own work, we lose opportunities. So we lose the opportunity to influence and make our voice heard, and to explain and to decision makers why certain choices should be perhaps done in a different way. From this point of view, we must educate people, but we must also learn how to communicate these things properly. And this is the things that the geoscientists do worst.
I'm going to go. There's a question just here, I think.
I'm Bernard Freund from the European Space Agency, and I often get this question from politicians and from the public. You have so much funding in space research, in geoscience research. You have all the knowledge, the tools. Why do you come to us for more funding? Why don't you apply your skills, your tools, to create yourself new job opportunities for the youth? So how can we better, for instance, partner with industry to create funding to sustainably fund our research, basic research, but also job opportunities for services that are attached to geoscience?
Who wants this one? Who wants this one?
Okay.
I was because it's space. I went for you.
That's okay. Yeah. Personally, I would answer to that the research is a production chain. We have fundamental research that may be focused or broader, but with lead times of decades. So people have done research in all areas where it's clear that over the next 10, 20 years, these things will not be applied, but maybe in the more long-distance future. And then there is research that is closer to the application, and then there's applied research. And we need to excel at all three levels, at the more fundamental, more applied, and very applied or technology. So this is what I would answer. It just will not do more applied research. You also need the fundamental part.
Of course, but what about short-term employment goal, which is now the first priority of the public, of the politician? So how can we also help in short-term employment?
infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of activity going around, and many universities are quite active to help with start-up companies. My own university just started one on Earth observation, moisture, water, natural hazards, a start-up company. These are the things that are being done, and I agree maybe we should do more of those.
I think Luca wants to come in.
Yeah.
No, you are right. Until a few years ago, also ourselves, Geosciences, was always searching for European Union money. Then at a certain point we realized that was not a good strategy in the long term. We have completely reverted our approach. We are not going anymore to knock at the doors of politicians. It's the opposite. We have been working in explaining them why it is absolutely crucial, and also their interest, not citizens' interest, their personal interest, to play a major role in this and in getting expertise from us, unbiased expertise. This has led to a series of very positive effects, such as now actually we are continuously asked to respond to requests, and we are advising the European Union institutions on crucial matters such as job creation. And the typical result is the fact that the European Institute of Technology, it was launched 10 years ago, now will have a so-called knowledge innovation community on raw materials. And there are 2 billion euro that are going to be invested into this new series of knowledge innovation communities. And the specific one on raw materials is done in cooperation between institutions and especially the industry, small and medium enterprises, and the main scope is to foster the creation of new, like an incubator, let's say. And so this is a typical example on how geoscientists can have an impact and generate job creation in a short term.
I'm going to go to the audience and see if there's any other questions. There's one up there. Do you just want to see if that microphone's working, sir? Maybe easier.
Sounds like it works. I'm from the United States at Northwestern University. I have a question about communicating complicated science to elected officials. And they're busy people and to their staffs, busy people with short attention spans. And is it more of a challenge for the complexity of the science versus the uncertainty of your own findings, and how do you present an objective and accurate assessment of the uncertainty? So I'd be very interested in your thoughts on that.
And can I throw alongside that one to the panel as well, that idea that, because I think there's a perception that there are politicians, decision makers don't understand science, that they're even kind of science literate. And I'm not sure to what extent that's true, but that kind of relates to your question about how much science do they have.
Yeah, I was only speaking about the United States. I'm sure they're better.
I think that's a given across the board. But who'd like to take that up, that challenge up?
No. No. Still not? No, but it doesn't work. Yeah. Now, I think science communication is one, I think, of the major topics feeding into public policy. And I have to say my experiences in the United States are relatively fantastic when I compare it to Europe, because already the young generation is actually trained to speak in a way which which politicians can understand. They are also trained in order to visit politicians on the regional level. I work in Washington, D.C., so very often we have this kind of hill blitz where we take the postdocs along and train them to work with staffers and discuss. And I think that's something which is extremely elaborated already in the United States, coming with simple messages, which important subjects where we know that politicians are sensitive, and trying a continuous dialogue. And I must honestly say that I see that in Europe less happening. Additionally, what I think happens more in the US than in Europe is this really openness to society. and speaking in public fora, engaging citizens in very important issues, and closing the gap between science and society. And I do think that activities are everywhere booming now in order to increase that, because everybody sees that this is a major drawback. You have also, if you want to catch politicians and if you want to convince them, you have to have the word of the public and of the society behind you, which gives you enormous strength. I think that there are a lot of activities also now in Europe coming. Everybody knows how important that is, and it is an advancing and I would say evolving field right now.
I would like to add to the part of your question where you ask about the complexity and uncertainties. And I think you are making a very important point there. In this, I mentioned we have these academies and our researchers and institutions are involved in there, and we're working also with the National Academy of Sciences, for instance, in Washington. I think what is not clear in this public discussion is the role of science, and particularly how science functions. That we often don't have the definite answer that we are asked for. And within our community, this is understood. It's very well understood, there's no problem. But when we go into the public domain, into the public arena, we often appear, at least, as we would have the ultimate answer. And that is problematic because sooner or later there will be questions. There will be questions, how certain are your climate models? How certain do you really understand the underground when you do hydraulic fracturing? Is there certain problems that you might not understand? And yes, when we drill for geothermal power, we all of a sudden experience we don't understand what is happening there, and so forth. So I think this is, as the science aspects become more and more important in our societies, as we educate more and more people academically, I think the role of science, of scientists, that science is first of all asking questions, because the answers will come, but asking the right questions in the right context might be much more important than maybe the specific answers. But to communicate this, I believe this is very important. What it means in the German context, when we communicate into the public, is we understand ourselves as being part of a dialogue. Science is part of a dialogue. And we don't even come up with recommendations. We call it options, scientifically based options, that are then introduced, transferred into these debates and dialogues with feedback into the science arena, and then finally recommendations may be drawn that might then become regulations or whatever laws or so forth. So I think this is really not an easy situation, because as a true scientist, you must be prepared to give up your opinion when there are new facts that are proven available. And that is different from policymakers. They will stand firm, at least for some time, with their opinion, even though there are maybe good arguments that would be against this position. So I really believe that your point is very well taken.
Lydia, you're nodding away there. Are your political paymasters, is the point of educating them about science, or is it something more subtle?
So I think that's a really interesting point around... sorry, I've just lost my thought now. Sorry, can you just reiterate your very last point? You were saying about... Okay, I'll come back to it. Okay. So going back to that question. There is obviously a big challenge around communicating complexity and uncertainty, and I think for us we do try and assume that we are talking to a lay audience, but we try and be accurate enough so that it's not, it's only kind of omitting unnecessary detail rather than actually contradicting the actual science out there. I think it's very much a case about being clear about where there is uncertainty and what the nature of that uncertainty is. So whether it's uncertainty that's kind of intrinsic to the systems that you're studying, or whether it is uncertainty that's due to kind of a lack of knowledge, and that whether further research could reduce that uncertainty. And then also being really clear about where there's consensus as well, or where there isn't consensus in scientific opinion, because clearly, like any other social environment, you have differences of opinion, and sometimes the consensus is clear, and sometimes it isn't. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to try and explain my...
Gunther, can we come back to this? Because there's a couple more questions in the audience, and then maybe we can catch it up, or is that a quick point following directly?
I'd like to quickly add to the complexity uncertainty question, because indeed I think this is a very important and interesting point. What struck me is, why is it so much an issue in the geosciences that we have uncertainty and complexity, and not so much in other fields? So few people were upset that the financial crisis was not predicted. Why is that so? Why are people upset if you cannot predict earthquakes? That's a very interesting societal process, actually. And for us, I think this is an opportunity, because it really means the general public has trust in what we are doing. Perhaps we should better use the opportunity and actually live up to these expectations and live up to the trust that other disciplines actually do not have.
Can I just go to, I think there's a question just in here, and then, we're starting to get them, and then I'll go there, and then I'll go there, if I can, and then I'll go over there. Okay, so here first. See if you're loud enough.
Ben Laken, I'm from Institute of Astrophysica de Canarias. I just had a question. It's been about 20 years since the first IPCC report, and these are incredibly clear examples of science and policy, and a very clear message. But in that time, I mean, there's been no slowdown in carbon dioxide. We're about to hit 400 ppm. Do you think that in light of that, the link between science and policy isn't important as the link between policy and business? And how does that affect what you do?
So the question's that inability to... so I'm just going to put it in the middle. I'm not necessarily... So the question's about essentially the ineffectiveness. There's all this good science, but the ineffectiveness of getting across to policymakers. And yet, on the other side, business seems to be much more effective at getting its message across. And so, is that tension there?
I think I would answer your question in two ways. First of all, I would say we have been quite successful in some of the environmental problems that are more on a regional or national level. In some of our areas, for instance, with cleaning the air, cleaning waters, and also on biodiversity, where you can act, or maybe on a European level. But when it comes to global questions, we have been successful with specific aspects concerning ozone depletion, fluorides, and things like that. But the CO2 question is really a challenge that can only be successfully addressed at a global level, and there are, you're right, I guess, very strong economic implications that would not follow these kind of rules, because they are the developing countries as compared to the developed countries and so forth. We all know these arguments. So I think this is a specific problem that cannot be addressed so easily as maybe regional aspects where we have been successful.
Anyone else want to come in, or will they go to... Lydia's keen to come in? All right, Luca, it's probably easier for...
Okay. Just to, I guess, highlight that, that scientific evidence is only one aspect of all of the other types of evidence and consideration that politicians have to take into account when they're making their decisions. And so, I mean, from Post's perspective, we're very much trying to offer up, this is what the science says in this area, and this is the potential impact that it could have, but then handing it over to them to put it in its policy context and to make that decision. So, as we've heard, you know, there are economic considerations, there'll be legal considerations as well. In some scenarios where the scientific case has already been made, it may be that having more scientific evidence isn't necessarily going to shift people's positions, and then it becomes a case of needing to tackle it politically, and that's how you move to a consensus on what to do.
Luca?
Very quickly, I don't think that the link science policy is less important or less effective than the link science policy business. I think that there is also an important link that if it's not established, should be established, in any case has to be maintained, is between science and business. It's a triangle. We have to operate with the scientists should not stay closed in their corner, but they should work very closely with the business worlds, with industry in particular. That is very receptive, actually, from my experience. Clearly, there are economic needs. The industry must make a profit, and we should not even try to compete with them. When we talk to the European Commission DG Energy, it's obvious that when a big oil company brings whatever it's got on its back on the table, it's a much stronger impact with bureaucrats, politicians, etc. We should work in a different way. We have the tools to do that, and it is our fault if we are not able. It's not that the business plays some dirty job. They just do their job. We must work together. It's a win-win situation. Otherwise we will.
Can we move to? I think yeah. Have you got a question there?
Hello, I'm Martin Kunz from the Max Planck Institute for Biogeochemistry in Jena. From several talks by authors of the IPCC reports, I got the impression that those people are very careful with political statements. So they would never say, like, we have to shut down coal power plants. They would say, if they run for 10 more years, we will increase the anthropogenic carbon flux to the atmosphere by this and this much. And several people criticize this. They say, if it's obvious some measures have to be taken, then they should state it that clearly. Can you tell me your opinion on this or comment on this attitude?
I think that's a really good question, and part of the general bit, I think that idea of the scientists stepping across the divide into the advocacies is kind of underpins that whole thing. Pascal?
I just wanted to relate some comments of colleagues I have which are working in these working groups for the IPCC and how they actually process a document. And you know how many people are involved, how many policy people additionally to the scientists are involved from each country where everybody has his input. And I have shown, I've seen figures how this process goes, and that you go through each wording of each statement and you have to make a compromise between zillion of countries. And this is the result of an enormous worldwide consensus. So this is the process. You can criticize it. On the other way, I have to say that it is, I have seen how complicated process is in a presentation and how many hours and nights people wordsmith on one argument or one recommendation, that it is a consensus, a worldwide consensus, which means something. And obviously we can criticize this is not enough and it will be too dangerous and we should state it more frankly. But I think you have also to respect the process, how the IPCC works.
Well, one word, because Germany has taken quite some steps in trying to reduce CO2, and particularly in the energy field with the Energiewende. We have installed huge amounts of wind power, photovoltaics. If the wind would blow every day, day and night, we could support Germany by wind power on a weekend day easily already. But it doesn't occur in this way. And the fact is, because we didn't observe the whole system, that from the electricity field, even though we have installed all these 35,000 megawatts in photovoltaics and another 35,000 megawatts in wind, we have now more CO2 coming out of electricity. Because gas is too expensive to compensate for the times when we don't have the renewables, and coal is more competitive. So this is the situation that we have. This is not that science didn't know, but we did not take the whole picture into consideration. Now we see this, and now we have to find ways to cope with this. Because a gas-powered power plant will only be economically efficient if it runs at least 4,000 hours a year. And if you have only 1,000 hours where you need it, coal is the bridging between the renewables and the conventional. And you get out, at the end of the day, more CO2, and that is the situation. So it's also important to take this complexity and take the whole picture and then give you a recommendation. And we even import hard coal from the US right now because they don't need it, they have the shale gas.
But as a general point, I think underneath it, is there a compromise that you make from being a scientist when you go into the policy dimension? Is there a place where you actually cross a line that means that you can't behave like a scientist, you have to behave like something else? Is that a problem that people have found when you go into policy dimension, or does that not exist, is it?
I think it is very important that you see your vis-a-vis, you have to see how a politician works, what kind of problems he faces, how he can achieve something. And you have really, I think when you work in policy, you are sometimes in a very rough position because you are in between politicians and scientists, and you get shouted at by both. That happens. But when you do it, I say with enthusiasm, you try really to get the good out, the good information out. You try to empower scientists how to talk to politicians, and you let them. You show them what is important for a politician, that not only negative messages, only negative messages will not move anything. You know, that you really have to come with something and say, look what I have to offer. How can we convert that in something which is important for society? What's in for you? It is always a win-win situation which you have to achieve. Otherwise, you will not succeed.
If I may add to that, yes, I think indeed we need different language and clearer messages when we approach politicians. And I would like to bring up another aspect, the other aspect, that of liability. Let's give you an example. There was a big flood in June 2013, last year in Vienna, just a few meters from here. It was really big. It was the biggest flood in the past 200 years at the Danube. And then I was invited to interviews, and I had to be very careful about making statements, what were the processes involved in the flooding, because liabilities are involved. These statements, when made public by experts, can take into court. And there was a lot of public debate revolving around who is paying for the damage. And if we make a statement, these can be used not just in the public debate, but also in court about resolving the processes, who is paying for damage. So yes, we need to use a different language here when we are among ourselves in the room, where we can talk about uncertainties, we can speculate, we can have a more broader view of all the factors coming in, and a clearer language and a more careful language when we go out to the general public and politicians.
I'm going to go to the audience again. If you shout it out and I'll repeat, but... I was going to... here, hold on.
Thank you. I'm Nicolache from the British Geological Survey. I have an impression that, because we're talking about science, which in itself has a certain way of thinking. It's very much based on a quantification. And well, in the British Geological Survey, when we talk to policymakers, I mean, I find that the expectation of a policymaker is wanting to know exactly a certain quantity. When will a flood come, or when will something happen, which is what has been mentioned before. But in terms of the way I view science, I then begin to think, well, I should be questioning the way that we think in science. What is science based on? How did we as human beings create the thinking of our science, which in a sense our society is based on that as well. So although now we are driven towards working more as scientists, working more and more with businesses, which because we must finance our own work, but now it feels like we have less time for reflection because we have to give instant answers for tomorrow by next week, and so. The drive towards working in a much faster way with less time for reflection to then question how science is actually developing in ways of thinking, which seems to be a paradigm in itself. Well, I would like to just put this forward, and if there are any answers to this.
So I guess it kind of ties back a little bit to this question. So it's about the nature of the way we think in science. And I guess it ties back a little bit into, there's several people brought up, interdisciplinarity and the need to kind of step outside of discipline. So I guess just translating a little bit, does geoscientists need to bring on more kind of broader ways of thinking into itself? So I don't know who wants to take it on.
Well, I think this is definitely necessary to have a broader interdisciplinary, even what we call transdisciplinary approach. But I think there is no way around solid science. Just think about medicine. If you would come up with certain medication that is not sufficiently experienced or proven, what it could happen. The same could happen in other aspects as well. So I think there is, from my point of view, there is no way around solid science. And what is really the coin we can pay with? This is our reputation. Once you lose your reputation as a scientist, you lose your value. So I think this is hard, I know. This does not mean that we cannot try to give answers immediate, but only on the present state of knowledge. And it's also important to translate it into a more understandable language. All these aspects are very important. But I would see it very problematic to leave our scientific background, even in these discussions, even if it is needed, from a political point of view. But we can only say what we know or what we think we really know.
I'd like to add to this from an educational point of view. Yes, I fully agree. We need to have firm education, a firm background, and doing firm research in disciplinary research. Otherwise, we will lose credibility. From an educational background, this means what I like is the concept of an apple core. You start in primary school with a broad education, then it's narrowed down in secondary education, further narrowed down in the bachelor, undergraduate education. That there's a very deep, solid knowledge of one particular area of the sciences. And then if you proceed your career, the width of the expertise and the linkages to other disciplines are further increased and broadened. Towards the end of the career, this model would imply that there's a lot of interconnections and breadth of the research that's being done or overseen by senior researchers. But somewhere in the career, There needs to be a period where solid, in-depth research is pursued for credibility and also for the methodological personal development.
Anyone want to come in? Otherwise, I'll go to another question. So there's a question on the far... Well, let me bring the microphone. It's easier. Do you want to? Thanks.
So I'm James Hammond from Imperial College London. And I guess my question's about access to policymakers. So is it like relatively young scientists? I was kind of accidentally thrust into the world of science and policy by, well, I was invited by North Korean scientists to collaborate on a project on a volcano there, which included taking out seismometers and other equipment. And we got it funded, but it then became a real struggle to actually engage with policymakers to get around the obvious implications of sanctions and everything, which we managed to do, but it was about a 2.5-year struggle to do that. And I guess my question was, as someone who from completely outside the field, what's the best approach to actually engage with policymakers when this kind of opportunity would arise?
Who would like to take that? Lydia.
So from a UK Parliament perspective, one quite good way of identifying members of Parliament who would be interested in a particular topic is to look at the all-party parliamentary groups, which are kind of informal groups of parliamentarians that meet and discuss a particular topic. So you can kind of identify different areas of interest. So that can be a good way of finding particular people to target. Approaching your member of parliament either for home or if you live somewhere different to where you work than your university. Speaking. Then using other sort of policy networks, so learned societies or academies that you may be involved in professionally, or you could perhaps become involved in, will have dedicated policy teams who will be they'll have existing relationships with policymakers and may allow you to enter in that way. And then if there's any sort of parliamentary activity that's going on, so if there are any related select committee inquiries, and then potentially going through government departments as well. So the Government Office of Science are within the UK government provides direct science advice to government. So there could be advisors that you could approach that way.
Can you repeat the question? Do you have something at EGU for these topics? Some? Do you have any policy help from EGU that we could get? Sure. We have a strong program of outreach in EGU, which is organized in various committees. And also in the office, people are active, a number of staff members in media activities, outreach activities, where we're trying to bring across what are science news, what are important subjects, and better make the research that is being done by the constituency of EGU visible to the general public and politicians.
And Luca, I think, wants to...
My recommendation is that you partner with those, when you know that the link with politicians is necessary, is that you partner with some institutions that is by mandate regularly in touch with them. There are several BGS, British Geological Survey people in this room. They are a public body, so it's certainly easier for them to access those channels. It's very practical.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Anything? Oh, yeah, okay. For me? I'm not sure that's allowed. Okay. Let's go for it.
If you are teaching on your television programs,
Yeah.
do you notice people are more interested when you teach about problems like
It's the wonder and interest. That's a very good question. I guess maybe one of the things that I'll slightly bend that around to a panel, which is that in our geoscience courses, we teach all the technical aspects, people come out. Should we have mandatory courses on public communication, even on political science and policy, as options or mandatory courses in there in order to broaden us out? Or do you think that's got a dilemma? I don't know who wants to pick up on that question. The original question was about, we spend a lot of time talking about issues and not enough about the general amazement and wonder. And definitely on popular media culture, that's what wins. That's what gets people's attention, including politicians. So how do we use that, and how do we know that that is a tool in our kind of toolkit? But I'd like to put it back into the education thing, as we're training people about geoscientists, how big an element should that be?
I guess it depends on the program. I know for a number of earth science programs that indeed have a strong component in socioeconomic and communication skills. But from my perspective, one thing is the training of these skills, but there's only so much you can teach, and with these practical things, it's just equally important, even perhaps even more important, actually do it. Like you can teach ethics, but there's even more value then you understand the system rather than telling people what to do, the morale of it. So, yes, there are programs around that have these courses. Maybe we should have more of these. And of course, there's a dilemma because you take time from the hardcore subjects of geosciences. But equally important, as I said, about trying it out, applying it, then it becomes real.
I think when we take a little bit more the concept of lifelong learning, it's not necessary that we learn everything in one period, like in a bachelor or master program. We could see it in a more extended development. For instance, as I mentioned, our center in Potsdam belongs to the Helmholtz Association. This is one of the extra university research organizations in Germany. It was about 40,000 people. And we have established now an academy for these kind of questions, for postdocs and younger professors. And in the beginning, there was some skepticism. Now, after 2 or 3 years, all courses are overcrowded. People see a real benefit in these kind of developments. And I think this is not relevant for all of our researchers and scientists, but some that have interest in this and maybe some ability and so forth. I could see this on a situation on lifelong learning. It is maybe also a process where at a certain point in time you become a leading scientist, where you have to make certain decisions that these kind of skills may then help, and particularly also in the communication situation. So we have very positive situation with this development.
Pascal, have you got thoughts on this in terms of, you brought up interdisciplinarity earlier on?
I do think if you do not mix wonders, miracles, and amazing earth sciences in your courses, then you are not a good teacher. It has to be a mixture between, in particular, this topic. I think the interdisciplinarity of geoscience, which is intrinsic. Additionally, one aspect, because I see we are running out of time, I'm not sure if there is a closing statement, an aspect which we didn't cover so much is this incredible worldwide data sharing, international, global network of geoscience. These are things which I think are very important for a young generation which has to be working globally in the future, which will have to solve grand challenges which are, a global problem. So I think that we need to prepare a generation with that, and that includes wonders.
Okay, Gunther? Or Lydia, So the politicians, do they go for the detail or do they go for the amazing wonder and splendor, do you think? What do they buy into?
I think it can be both. I think it will depend on the individual parliamentarian as to whether they have interest in a particular area. But we'll have exhibitions where people are demonstrating aspects of the Large Hadron Collider, and there are hands-on exhibits and things, and they'll enjoy that as much as anyone else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from Luca? You want to finish?
I think from my experience, more than I think, wonder is for public at large. Politicians need solutions. They want solutions. So that's what we have to provide them in very simple terms. So with scientifically sound background, but in very simple terms. And this is the bridge effect between communication, capacity of the scientist and his science basis.
Nice. Okay, well, I think we should draw a close because we're out of time. So I'd like to thank you for coming along and for your questions, and I'd also like you to thank the panelists for their contributions as well. Thank you very much.